Sorry this is rather short, but here is my ordeal from the weekend. On Saturday, I got a call from a few friends about going to the mall. It was a stressful week at work, so I thought some retail therapy would definitely help. We shopped for the typical lady stuff like makeup, lingerie, and shoes before we decided on hitting the food hall for a spot of lunch. I gave the girls my order and told them I would come and find them, as I needed to use the restroom. The restrooms were at the end of a large and wide corridor, and they were your typical mall with lots of stalls. Anyways, so I sat down to, and I could see from the gap on the floor between the wall of the stall and the floor lots of movement from someone's shadow. I wasn't sure if they were getting changed or not, so I didn't pay much attention at first, but it felt like the shadow was coming from above at some points. As if the light above were being obstructed by something. After maybe the third time, I decided to look up and I could see a phone and parts of a guy's arm leaning over. Somebody was taking photos of me. I instantly shouted out, "What the heck, you pervert?" And in a moment of sheer shock and disbelief, this all very quickly turned to fear as I got up and leapt out of the stall and was greeted by an empty bathroom. Not one person in sight, and from the quick glance of mirrors opposite, there was only one stall shut that was next to mine. I ran for the restroom exit, but it was locked. Luckily, it had a twist lock that I could turn, and as I did, I heard a stall open from behind me. I got out immediately and turned as I exited and noticed a sign on the door saying, "Closed for maintenance." This sign was not here when I went in. I screamed some more, shouting to get anyone's attention as I ran down the corridor towards the food hall, and it obviously caught the attention of a few people. A group of 3 guys stopped me, and they clearly could see the panic in my eyes. They quizzed me. I explained. 2 ran towards the ladies' room, and 1 ran to find security. Security arrived within seconds, and after a while, a rather large crowd had gathered due to the commotion, and although I was in the comfort of my friends, security and now the police, I never felt more alone. Security and the police found nobody. There were a few staff only and fire exit doors down the corridor, so plenty of escape routes for whoever this guy was to go through. I gave my statement down at the station later that day once my parents showed up. The police said they had security tapes from the CCTV cameras that point down the corridor and will keep us updated with any news. Hopefully they find this guy. For some context, I had a really shitty childhood. It was terrible as I don't remember anything from birth all the way to 13 years of age. Everything I know about what happened through all those years was a mixture of sparse memories, things my family has told me about myself, and even police reports. One of those things I do remember, however, is this lady I called Auntie. No first name, no last name, nothing else contributing to her identity. She was just Auntie. I started seeing her when I was 7 years old, sitting in her living room as she typed everything I said down on her laptop. I had no problem with her. I saw her once every month and she seemed gentle enough that I really thought that she was somebody I could trust, so I did. 7 years later, 14 years old, I admitted to her that I was struggling big time. It was a mixture of multiple different factors. My mom's increasing toxicity, the lack of social interaction at the time, and more importantly, I never moved on from the horrors in my childhood. Now, I was 14 years old at the time, and I was able to wonder why these meetings with Auntie never actually seemed to help me, especially to do with the fact that I begged her to tell me why I constantly felt upset. I remember on the way to Auntie's house, I asked my mother if I would ever get the chance to see a different person, maybe get a different sort of help that Auntie clearly couldn't give. I was just hissed at to be quiet. Around that time, the relationship between me and my mother began to crack. My mother became a source of grief to me, and I cried about it during multiple sessions with my auntie. Auntie, at the end of these sessions, would try to defend my mother or make me seem like I'm blowing things out of proportion. I tried to come up with my own reasons at the time for why she was not trying to understand things wholly, and I chalked it up to her being empathetic, maybe being able to explain why my mom was terrible was supposed to help me embrace it in some weird way. And then more things like that seemed to happen. I admit that when I was 16 years old, I was a terrible kid. I went to parties, drank whatever was served, and definitely did not tell anyone what I was doing. But then Auntie started to ask very specific questions, especially to the topics mentioned above. I was in shock. Again, I gave her the benefit of the doubt and thought that her sudden pinpointing of these things must be from the fact that at this point, she's known me for almost a decade. All the way into a year later, she started to bring up the parties I've gone to in these sessions without even bothering to hide behind questions. The relationship between me and my mother had almost been completely severed, and the worst part of all, something that still affects me to this day, was at the end of each session, Auntie had started to invite me into the room and tell her every single thing I said. It was terrible, hearing my own words against my mother, explaining the increasing abuse that she has begun to put me through, and straight to her face as she sat next to me. My grades in school began to drop. My mother forbade me from going out, and I was completely isolated. I ran into my mother's room looking for something. I remember rummaging through everything until I went into her walk-in closet. I had barely gone into her room. In fact, I completely forgot about the fact that she even had one of these. In my crazy state, I just remember running into her closet and looking through every crevice. I stumbled upon a suitcase leaning against the wall under the hung-up clothes. If I close my eyes, I can still imagine it. It didn't look old, so that was probably what made me decide to open it up. When I did, all I saw was a shit ton of papers. The surprise of seeing so much snapped me out of the state I was in, and I recall sitting cross-legged on the floor and wondering what the heck those papers were. After a while of reading, I realized that these were transcripts of Auntie's and my sessions, literally dating all the way back to some of the first sessions that I did. I remember feeling sick, feeling so sick. I at least had enough sense to steal a few of the papers to make it less noticeable. Reading through those transcripts just filled me up with more and more bitter questions, and I decided that night that I would figure out what was going on. I was on a time crunch, feeling stressed because I really only had a year left to figure out what the heck was going on, before I was faced with the looming threat of being kicked out as soon as I turned 18. I started to pay way more attention in our sessions, looking around her house whenever I got the chance to, looking for some indicators that could tell me who the psychologist really was. I started asking my mom more and more questions about Auntie, and she kept deflecting, repeating the same fact. She was a psychologist. That's until I did something that literally almost ruined the rest of my life. I decided to steal my mom's phone. It seems like a small thing now, but then it was really life or death. My mom was in the shower, and I had already packed all the stuff I needed to be out for a few hours, maybe even for a few nights somewhere. As soon as I heard the door lock, I swiped my mom's phone and bolted out of the house. I didn't even look down at the damn thing until I was on the bus. I remember looking through my mom's messages first, and I knew I found Auntie when I stumbled across an unfamiliar one. Even better when the messages clearly showed when my mother booked appointments. I scrolled up for a while, enough for the bus to get me to a safe place, but even as I walked off the bus and years of texts were read, nothing incriminating had shown itself. I then looked through my mother's call logs, and I saw the fact that they call extremely often. I wasn't an idiot. Whatever was really going on was happening on calls instead of messages, which was smart. I'll give credit where credit is due, but it still didn't get me anything. I found a place to sit at the end of the road, and I continued my search. I looked through my mom's social media, and when I tried searching up Auntie's name, nothing came up. I genuinely felt all hope leave my body then, and sometimes now I swear I can still feel the same sick feeling as I felt then. I almost gave up. Almost. Every day I thank myself for mindlessly swiping through my mother's followers because I found her. Her account name didn't have her real name, it was some weird fake one. But when I clicked on her profile, it was most definitely her. She posted photos with some of my mother's friends, and I scrolled for a while down her page until I saw a photo that I posted of her and my mother years ago. They have literally been friends even before I was born. I felt sick, betrayed, and a bit relieved that I now knew what the heck was going on. Why my mother had transcripts, and why Auntie didn't think twice before telling my mother every single thing I said, and why she defended her. I didn't even bother to find a place to stay that night. I just went back home. I got beaten black and blue for doing something that didn't deserve any forgiveness. It didn't hurt at all compared to what I found out earlier that day. All I asked my mother that night was, who is Auntie really? And she couldn't even answer that. A few years later, I was in my first year of university. I had the lucky chance to move out of my mother's house as soon as I got the chance to, with an old friend taking pity on me and allowing me to stay with him since we applied to the same university. He's one of my best friends now. What finally gave me closure in some bittersweet way was clearing out my Instagram. I deleted people that I didn't care about or didn't know. My heart dropped when I saw a familiar username in my followers. I didn't think about it at all when I searched up the username in the search bar, and when it came up with Auntie's Facebook account. This psycho had been following me for who knows how long on my Instagram, and suddenly everything that didn't click finally made sense. The sudden precise questions. Why did my mother suddenly decide to isolate me from my friends? It didn't even say psychologist or anything of the sort in her bio. Tell me why I said chemistry teacher with over 20 years. I admit that I cried like a baby that night because it had taken years for me to finally understand why two of my main female models seemed to despise me. Still, to this day, I mourn the fact that most of my early adult years are being used to heal from everything in my childhood. Instead of going out with newly made friends and giving my all to university, it sucks. Everyone who hears my life story agrees on the fact that there's something wrong with them. I just wish I knew that sooner. 2 days ago, I had my first session with a real psychologist. Trust me, I did my research. I felt almost ashamed when I blurted out the reason why I'm sitting in this guy's chair. But he just smiled and told me we had a lot of work to do. Yeah, we do, lol. I decided to post about my experience just on the slight chance anybody had a familiar experience with therapy becoming messed up, or they feel like they've been living in a hole their entire life. I promise you guys it gets better, with a little bit of luck and surrounding yourself with the right people at least. Anyways, Auntie, let's not meet again. Hey guys, here's a little update on the guy that was in my barn a bit ago. I did see him again, but I'll get to that. Plus some of my coworkers have noticed some things. So I worked 2 night shifts again this past weekend, and there are certain doors in the barn that I can't lock even if I want to, so I just have to be extra cautious about it. One of those nights I got there early in hope of maybe getting off before midnight. That being said, I was the only one there for a little bit. Stupid, I know, but I was tired and thought it would be nice to have a head start. I went out to the barn to get the first pen of milking cows. I just remember feeling overall uneasy. It might have been just me being paranoid given the previous situation. Well, that night I thought I saw somebody lurking in the pasture in which we had the heifers in earlier. I couldn't see very well because it was dark, but I swear that I saw an all too familiar smile with the little light I had coming from the silos. But I figured I was hallucinating, being a little bit skittish, so I brushed it off and went in the barn. I almost had the whole first pen to the parlor when my coworker showed up. We continued the night as usual, and then I had to start the pasteurizer. Of course, I didn't want to, but I had to. I went in there and the calves seemed fine. Everything seemed perfect. I looked around, not hard enough, you'll come to find, and everything was good. I went back to help milk the second pen. After that pen, I went to feed the calves while my coworker went to get the third pen like usual. Like I said, everything seemed fine. I was probably in there for around 20 minutes feeding the hutch cows bottles, which typically takes longer, and we had 6, so it took a little bit. Then I went to the far pens where I saw the man the last time and everything was alright. Then I went to feed the middle pens, and that's when something didn't seem right. One of the calves was lying down and refused to get up to eat, so I hopped the fence to help it up. Just a note, I set the pail of milk on the ground in between the 2 middle pens. I turned around once I got the calf up, and there he was. This time, he was standing still smiling. I still couldn't really see his face because it was covered, but he was still wearing the same clothes, which was weird because it was 60-something degrees out that night. He wasn't overly tall or big, but just had a really creepy appearance and smile. He didn't say anything, just smiled. I have a knife on me for work purposes, usually to cut baling twine. So I pulled that out just to have it, and then I jumped the fence again and ran back to the parlor just as I had the last time. I was working with the same girl, and she and I literally locked ourselves in the break room again and called our boss. He got there and we went to the calf barn again, and everything was just as I left it except for one thing. The milk pail that had previously been filled to a mark on it was now empty, and the milk was all over the ground around it, but the pail was placed back upright. My boss didn't know what to tell us, but he stayed at the barn for the rest of the shift. My other coworkers started reporting things going missing, cows being moved, lights turning on and off, doors being left open, and milkers being turned off. One even said that the man was sitting in one of the empty calf hutches, and they didn't realize it wasn't a calf until they went to feed it, and he was just smiling at them. The cops had been notified, and we now have a cop parked by the barn every other night, and one that stays in the area at all times. I don't know where he was when I checked the barn before I started feeding, because he wasn't in that pen. I checked. He definitely has some sort of hiding spot that I didn't see him in, or he was moving around the milk house as I walked through it or something. But this guy really creeps me out, and lately I've been turning down night shifts. I'll keep you guys updated on how the cop thing works out, and if I ever see him again. This whole thing just really freaks me out because I love my job and the people I work with, but I hate being afraid to go to work. So, to the guy who keeps showing up in my calf barn, please never come back. And let's never ever officially meet. First time posting a story, so I apologize for any errors. This was the most terrifying experience I've ever had. I've only ever told this to a few people because it does give me the chills every time I repeat it, but it's definitely worth telling. So, a little info. I live in the New England area, East Coast, and this took place last November and ended around February of this year. So one day, my dad had to take me to school because my mom left early for work. I go to a private school, and about 5 minutes into the drive to school, I noticed that I forgot my ID card, which I need to walk around the school with. So my dad turned the car around and we drove back home. Now, my house is gated and you need a code to get in. After we got through the gate, my dad and I noticed that there was somebody peeking through the windows. There was no car parked in the driveway though. I was a bit freaked out because I had no idea how this guy got in. The only way to get onto our property is by putting the code in at the gate. And no, he couldn't have jumped the gate. The sensor would have gone off. My dad tells me to wait inside the car and to lock the doors. He gets out and walks up to the guy that I can now see is about 40 or so. Now, this part gets a bit weird, but it's not uncommon at the same time. My dad looks exactly like Leonardo DiCaprio, and he gets told that almost every day. The next thing I know is, this guy asks for my dad's autograph and asks if he can take a picture with him. Very odd, I know. My dad nervously laughs and backs away a little bit. We could tell that this guy had some problems, so my dad offered to call somebody for him or even a cab. The guy says, "No, I'm good," and starts walking down our driveway. Okay, ready for this? When he gets to the gate, he puts the frickin' code in. Like, how did he know it? My dad then starts shouting at him and starts running down the driveway. This beat up white car stops, picks up the guy, and they take off. My dad goes inside our house, checks the place out, and calls me to let me know I can come in. Fast forward to mid-November. I should mention that I was 16 when this started. I turned 17 in late November. I'm also an only child, if that's even important. So, one night, my parents and I are having dinner and talking when the phone rings. We don't take calls during dinner, so we let the answering machine take it. Then we hear this really creepy voicemail. "Hey buddy, smoking wife, you got there?" And that daughter laughs. She's a peach. My dad got up and picked up the phone, but the person on the other line had hung up. I'm not really one to get freaked out easily, but I was very scared and I didn't sleep a wink that night. I should mention that by this time, we had completely forgotten about that guy on our property. Over the next 2 weeks, we got some really creepy phone calls, some in the middle of the night. Sometimes I would sleep on the couch in my parents' room, but let me just quickly tell you how awesome my dad is. He would stay up downstairs while my mom and I slept. And sometimes when I couldn't sleep, he and I would watch funny movies and play board games. He is incredibly protective of my mother and me, and he did everything he could to keep us safe and feel safe. For my birthday, my family and I went to New York for a few days. When we got back, everything seemed fine, until we started unpacking and noticed that some things were missing, like a few family photos, 2 of my dad's Rolex watches, and some of my mom's jewelry. Not knowing what else to do, we called the police. My dad is a surgeon, and he is sometimes on call, so he often would have to leave late at night, at which point my mom and I would sleep in the same room. My teacher noticed a huge change in me. I was always sleeping in class. I lost a lot of weight, and I just looked like a complete wreck in general. My teachers expressed these concerns with my parents, to which my mom and dad had decided to send me to therapy. The phone calls started coming almost every day now. One day at school, the office called me down to the front desk. I was informed that a relative was there to pick me up. My mind started going to a million different places. I was scared that something happened to my parents. I asked who it was, and they said it was my uncle. Now, this is where I got a little bit confused. I only have one uncle and he lives in London. I explained that there must have been a mistake, and the lady at the front desk pointed to the main entrance in the lobby. I had never seen him in my entire life. I told the lady that I wanted to speak to the principal. My parents were called to the school and I left early that day, and my mom and dad were very uncomfortable sending me to school the next day, so I ended up staying home for a few days. Long story short, this stalker issue became so big that we actually ended up moving to New York City. But before that, it was getting out of control. People showed up to the door, even after we changed our code to get in. We just felt unsafe, and I never want to feel that fright ever again, and I hope none of you ever have to experience that feeling. But thankfully nothing has happened since we moved, and I'm just so thankful that I had my family with me. So, to the stalkers who haunted my family for months, you better hope we don't meet again. Okay, so this happened a few years ago when I was beginning 9th grade. Forgive me if it gets to be a bit long. That's the nature of the narrative. Beware in advance, this is not one of those stories where something unexpected and creepy happens at the end. But the aftermath is still tragic beyond belief and left me permanently changed. Just for the reader to get a better picture, I live in the capital city of a third world country, and malls and cineplexes had fairly recently become a fad among the well-to-do in urban areas. A couple of girlfriends and I had gone out for a movie and dinner afterwards, at TGIF's, go figure. The subway system had also recently finished construction and become immensely popular here, so I thought, what the heck, I can take the subway. The subway stop was pretty close to our house as well, so it was really convenient. As I messed around on my phone trying to pass the time, I could see a boy no older than 18 or 19 constantly stealing covert glances at me. In that moment, all my feminist angst went out the window, and I can honestly admit I wished I hadn't worn a dress, thinking maybe he wouldn't stare if I had worn something more covering. Anyways, my stop arrived, and as one does at one stop, I got up and started to leave. This boy also got off at the same stop. Now in these types of stories, people often say how they knew something was off or weird. I didn't. He wasn't anything other than the standard issue creep I was used to in this city. This guy then falls into step a bit behind me, but not too far either. No issue. I am still thinking. No need to be paranoid. By now though, it's about 10 p.m, so I am getting worried and uneasy. It doesn't help that the street is practically empty, flanked by large houses and broken street lamps that light up jack shit. I can hear him murmuring into his cell phone, so I'm thinking maybe he really doesn't care about me. Then after some time, I notice he isn't there anymore. Yay. But I don't want to take any chances, so I call up my brother to just come and get me, and we'll walk the short way home together. So as I am walking my way and hoping my brother will catch up with me any second now, I see his shoe poking out of the alley. I just know it's that guy. Then I notice something that gives me chills even now. He's standing next to 3 other guys, and they're all jerking off together right there on the street. I'm scared shitless because A, I was a sheltered kid in a country where sex education is what is called literally taboo beyond belief, and B, who does that? I turned around and started walking away fast, hoping they didn't notice. But they did. They zip up their pants and sort of advance towards me. Not exactly threateningly, but definitely sneering at me trying to get away. I'm quickening my pace, but I know if I run, they'll run too and catch up with me. If I keep walking up ahead, it's a road that goes on for miles and miles, so I'm walking fast. Police number ready to dial, waiting for my brother to appear any second now, hoping these guys will go away. I was wearing a dress that buttons down the front, and one of the guys comes straight up before I'm able to run or dial the cops in, forcefully tears the first button off. A bit of my bra is now exposed. At this point, I know I'm going to be assaulted or murdered, and where the heck is my brother? Just wow. One of the guys is holding an iron rod about 3.5 feet in length. In our native language, he says, they're going to shove it up my cunt and then my ass. And the button-ripping guy firmly holds my wrist. Just then, I hear loud footsteps. My brother. Now I think the guys thought that they could take him because he was just one guy and sneered at me again when I called out to him almost crying and desperate, but they didn't realize one important thing. My brother is a 6'4" pro tennis player who bench presses more than these guys' body weight put together. As he gets close, they freak out. The original guy snatches a necklace I was wearing straight off my neck and they all run. I'm shaken and scared, but it's over now, so I go home, tell my parents, and we decide that we're going to go to the police the next morning. The next morning, we do go to the police. Magically, they show us pictures of each guy. I'm really surprised because A, police here have a terrible track record investigating assault-type cases, and B, how did they do it without an actual complaint? They then tell my parents, who later tell me that these guys went on to brutally assault somebody 5 kilometers away from my neighborhood. Chillingly, they'd taken my necklace and put it around the person's neck that they left for dead. But they were seen on tape by traffic cameras doing their heinous act and had been caught, and then it also admitted to harassing a girl of my description in my neighborhood earlier in the evening, before progressing to their final act. So I come from a really rich family which is fairly well known in political and business circles in my city. This is kind of relevant in two ways because A, this was why these guys were indicted fairly fast, and as my parents put a lot of pressure on the authorities. And B, I struggled with being angry at why wealth was such an important factor in these cases. Because assault is assault, right? The final few things I want to say are these. Even coming from a well-respected family, the policeman asked me why I was wearing a dress, implying that I was asking for it. Another appalling realization I had was, if I were not well-known or connected, if I were just a normal girl out with my friends, would any police personnel investigate my claims? If I didn't call my brother, would I be alive? Heck, most girls my age don't even have cell phones here. They couldn't call anyone. Finally, was I the cause of that person's assault and murder? What if they did that to her because they lost access to me? She belonged to a very poor family. If my parents hadn't intervened, if I weren't involved, would those men have walked free? If I didn't have stigma-free access to expensive therapy, would I ever be mentally sound again? This whole incident left me afraid of my own city and country. To this day, I haven't worn a dress outside after 5 p.m. It left me with a deep skepticism for law enforcement. I still feel a little bit guilty for that person that ended up dying and had their right to life taken away. And I still have concerns about how my family's wealth became such an important factor in this case. What about all the girls who can't afford all of my privileges? To end on a brighter note, I really have gotten over everything that happened to an extent. I'm even leaving home to study in the USA at a great university this year, and I am determined to not let this event determine what I do with my life in the future.